Bellyache. When Baba Segi awoke with a bellyache for the 6th day in a row, he knew it was time to do something drastic about his 4th wife's childlessness. He was sure the pain wasn't caused by hunger or trapped gas. It was from the build-up of months and months of worry. A grunt escaped from the woman lying next to him. He glanced sideways and saw that his leg had stapled Iyatokwe, his 2nd wife, to the bed. He observed the jerky rise and fall of her bosom, but he didn't move to ease her discomfort. His thoughts returned to Bolande, and his stomach tightened again. Then and there, he decided to pay Teacher a visit. He would get there at sunrise, so Teacher would know it was no ordinary stopover. As soon as his driver parked the pickup truck by the gutter that circled Aikara, Baba Segi flung open the passenger door and re-inflated his large frame. Without a word or a backward glance at his driver, he dashed down a narrow alleyway. If his eyes hadn't been entirely fixed on Teacher's shack, he might have noticed that his driver had scrambled after him. Baba Segi stepped aside to make room for the schoolchildren on their daily pilgrimage. These children went to great pains to bid Teacher good morning, just to see him steam up the louvers with his response.
"Good morning,"
the smoky-eyed sage hummed. The children waved happily and toddled off to school. Baba Segi shook his head. If their parents ever discovered that they had strayed from the dusty road that led to wisdom, stepped wide-legged over spluttering gutters, and shifted between random buildings, those children would be in grave trouble. Teacher's shack was in Aikara, and Aikara was not a place for children. It wasn't a specific place, but when you asked for directions, people looked away from their twirling wrists. There were 3 reasons for this. First, absolutely no one wanted to admit to knowing where it was, in case their neighbors were listening. Second, Aikara didn't have distinct boundaries. Last, Aikara was more than 4 or 5 parallel streets laced by lasciviousness. It was a spirit. The dark buildings were full of women whose faces glowed under ultraviolet lights. These women lived for other women's men. They cooked for them, drank with them, fought over them, fucked them, nursed them, slapped them, and loved them. And when the longing love caused made them ill, they surrendered their lives and died for them. Teacher's shack, with its shiny glass windows and gleaming shot glasses, was sandwiched between 2 brothels. Mostly, the skimpily dressed women brought their clients to drink the shack-made whiskey, but on certain days, they would get to the door and retrace their steps. These were the days when men glared at them through squinted eyes, the days that men came to meet men, to talk about women and the evil that they did. These meetings were not prearranged. They just happened when 2 or 3 men were gathered. They started with one man lamenting his travails with a quarrelsome wife. As more men ducked through the doorframe, solutions were proffered. What worked wonders, what didn't work, what was worth trying, and what, if the man concerned wasn't careful, would eventually kill him. Every man had his say, but Teacher always had the last word. He was impressive. There was no doubt about it. Even as the men sat curling at the ears from the heat, enveloped by the miasma of both human and animal waste, Teacher would busy himself with his windows without breaking a bead of sweat. Gradually, his eyes would smoke up and become teary. Only then would he speak, and only in the Queen's English. Baba Segi was first warned about Aikara when he was a young apprentice, but the cautioner was female and unconvincing. Besides, he had just moved to Ibadan, and his innocence had become a burden, the very kind Aikara women helped to relieve. 4 wives and 7 children on, he'd grown weary of the stench, and his visits had dwindled to once or twice a month. Still, these men had helped him through his darkest days. 16 years before, when he was an impatient 26-year-old husband, Baba Segi had sat with Teacher and 2 other men to discuss a predicament that was similar to the one he was in now. He had been eager for his sick mother to see the fruit of his loins, but his wife's menstruation persisted. Teacher had suggested that he visit a herbalist, and Segi had lapped up the dark green powder her husband sprinkled on her palm. The medicine worked swiftly. Segi cried with both grief and gladness at his mother's burial, 6 weeks after the birth of his daughter, Segi. The door of the shack stood ajar, so Segi entered the small room. He frowned. It annoyed him that Bolanle was the reason he had come. When just 2 years before, he had boasted of his conquest, how Bolanle was tight as a bottleneck, how he pounded her until she was cross-eyed, and how she took the length of his manhood on her back, splayed out and submissive. He didn't quite know how he would tell the men that all his pounding had proved futile. Inside the shack, Segi was confronted with the same men who had pumped his hand when he first announced his intentions to marry Bolanle. They were talking to teacher at a table by the window, so Segi dragged a stool over and joined them. They asked him what had brought him there so early in the morning, and he told them of the agony that Bolanle's barrenness caused him. Teacher closed his eyes and shook his head, while Olaokpa, whose lips were perpetually browned from kola nuts, let out a long breath. Although he also had 4 wives, he couldn't help remembering how the educated wife affair had overshadowed his own libidinal feats. None of his wives knew which end of the pencil to set to paper. Segi, I think you should drag her to a medicine man if she doesn't follow you. You are the husband, and she is a mere wife. And the 4th one at that. If you drag her by the hair, she'll follow you anywhere, I swear it. Atonda licked his forefinger and pointed it in the direction of his maker, even as he pinched a half-smoked stick of Captain Black from a tattered snuff box. The expression on his face was unforgiving. Atonda, you want to land Segi in jail. Who would dare to drag a graduate? When she opens her mouth and English begins to pour from it like heated palm oil, the corporals will be so captivated, they will throw our friend behind bars. Olaokpa was a retired police sergeant, and he knew, more than anyone else, that domestic violence was widely perceived as a waste of police resources. You are quite right, Olaokpa. Segi saw right through him. Besides, these educated types were fed on cow's milk. We, as you know, didn't have that luxury. We suckled our mother's breasts. If I lift my hand to her, the next thing I know, I could be conversing with Eledumare. No, we must never manhandle our women, especially not someone like you, Olaokpa, slight as you are. More men had ducked through the low door frame into the crowded room. Everyone chuckled. Yes, but whose wife's belly is as flat as a pauper's footstool? I may be slight, but I get the job done. Olaokpa was a sore loser. Thank you for returning our mouths to the matter at hand, my friend. Segi thrust the back of his head in Olaokpa's direction and turned to the other men present. They stared back at him with sympathy in their eyes. An old night guard scratched away at the print on his t-shirt. It said, 2001 is my year of increase. Why are you running skelter-helter, Segi? Teacher's voice rang through the silence. The sunlight ripped through the torn mosquito net, hit a glass, and shone a halo on the wall near his head. You are running from post to pillar when the answer is there in front of your face. Since the woman is educated, she will only listen to people from the world she knows. The place to take her is the hospital. By the time Segi arrived at his workshop, his shop assistants were waiting by the giant padlock. Their greetings were met with a dismissive grunt, and they swapped knowing glances. It was going to be one of those days when Segi would sit stone-faced in the back room with his head held up by his fist. Segi knew it too. He sat at his desk, reached into a drawer, and brought out the photograph Bolanle had pressed into his palm the day they met. As he thumbed away the film of dust on it, he thought how much her personality had changed. How she'd slowly lost her meekness and become full of quiet boldness. How discord had followed her into his home and made his other wives restless. He remembered the day when he first met her. She'd accompanied her friend, Yemisi, to his building materials store. Yemisi did small building contracts for the married men she screwed. Baba Segi issued her the overinflated invoices she requested and the goods. It was all part of the business. Just double all the prices, Yemisi urged. Baba Segi had noted Bolanle's embarrassment and was greatly relieved when Yemisi rushed outdoors to take a call on her mobile phone. Within moments, she came back into the store and announced that she had urgent business to attend to. Bolanle offered to wait for her in Baba Segi's store. After she left, there was a brief stillness, and Baba Segi had taken the opportunity to let his eyes lick her unpainted fingernails, her lean face, her dark plump lips, and her eyes. Every blink was slow and comely. He suddenly became aware that he was inhaling the air that came from her, and she was swallowing his. The gods have sent her to me, he thought, as his eyes rested on Bolanle's bosom. Now that you and your friend have finished university, are you going to marry a man who will look after you? He asked. When I find one, she replied. It didn't seem like an opening for a middle-aged man with 3 wives and a home full of children, but he took it as one. He watched as Bolanle dipped her hand into her bag and brought out a tattered novel. Am I not an entertaining host? Bolanle snapped the book shut. Tell me when you alone will come this way again, he whispered quietly. Bolanle fixed her eyes on the desk between them. Come tomorrow. Come the day after. Anytime I see you again, I will know the gods have favored me. Even he was surprised by his brazenness, but he sensed her vulnerability. And will your wives not come and drive me out with a broom? My wives do not visit my workplace. Your friend should have told you that. Why would they? They are taken care of. They have no reason to trouble me. Baba Segi felt an overwhelming urge to reach across the table and touch her, but he hid his fists under the desk. That was how it started. She came the next day, and then the next, and then every weekday, until he had to bask in palm wine at weekends to make time pass quickly. He couldn't wait to have her, to show her off as his own. He wanted to be the envy of all his peers. True enough, many did not hide their resentment. They told him he was a fool to marry a graduate, that she was only after his money, that she didn't really love him and would leave him for a younger, educated man after she got what she came for. Baba Segi laughed in their faces until eventually they came to terms with their own inadequacies. At 5, Baba Segi called Taju, his driver, and told him to start the engine of the pickup. His mind was made up. He would speak to Bolanle that night. It was Tuesday, and he would be spending the night with her anyway. He flopped into the passenger seat and stroked his hairless chin all the way home. Taju honked twice as he drove into the large compound. The entire household poured out of different rooms to welcome their benefactor. Baba Segi's 3 sons lay prostrate, their torsos curled upwards like mats rearing their edges. The daughters knelt before him. From the eldest child to the youngest, he called them by their names. Segi and Aki, a daughter before a son from his first wife. Tokwe, Afolake, and Motu, 3 girls born 11 months apart from the second. And Femi and Kole, sons smugly birthed by Iyafemi, his third wife. Baba Segi looked lovingly into the faces of the older children and pinched the cheeks of the younger ones. He made each child feel extraordinary. Midway to the sitting room, Baba Segi paused at the bogus archway, as if it had suddenly occurred to him that the children couldn't have delivered themselves. Then, like he always did, he swung round and turned to his wives, and with unabashed flirtatiousness, he greeted them. Iya Segi, Iya Tokwe, Iyafemi. Bolanle. Each woman curtsied, proud to be defined by her firstborn child, except Bolanle, who was Iya to none. The greetings done with, Baba Segi raised his arms so his agbada could be prized off by Iya Segi's deft fingers. She did the same with his buba, and Baba Segi stumbled into the sitting area in his trousers and his vest, his eyes leading the way to his luxurious armchair. He stood with his back to it, and, as always, he collapsed into it, as if he had been struck by death. He tore at his watch and pulled it off his wrist. Before he placed it on the wooden stool beside him, Iya Segi had put her hand out to receive it. He smiled the way he always did. Iya Segi, wife of my youth, would I have breath if I had not married you? Iya Segi paused and turned to him. May your breath be long, my lord. Where would I be if not for you? They were ritually joined in this reciprocal admiration until Iyafemi's bogus coughing interrupted them. The third wife could never stomach their display of old-fashioned affection. Besides, if any form of favoritism didn't involve her or her children, she was quick to register her disapproval. Iya Segi brought a long wooden stool and placed it in front of her husband, while her daughter Segi, measuring her every step, carried in a bowl of hand-washing water. After steeping his hands in the bowl, Baba Segi dried them with a towel that was draped over his daughter's arm. He pulled the stool towards his crotch and proceeded to demolish the mountain of amala, morsel by morsel, catching every string of ewedu that dripped down his wrist with his tongue. At the sound of a familiar melody, the children jostled for space in front of the TV and sang along to the theme tune of Afowofa, their favorite soap opera. Tálákà ń wapaki, olówó ń wọ̀rẹ́sì, ìgbé ayé ń yí o, kò sẹ́ni tó mọ̀ ọ̀la. The impoverished search for cassava flour, while the rich consume rice by the measuring bowl. The tide of the earth turns. No one knows tomorrow. Like all good soap operas, it ended on a cliffhanger that sent the children into a frenzy of cushion slapping and teeth kissing. Baba Segi chuckled. Tope, Motun, Afolake, Femi, Kole, he summoned. Come and share the tripe your father left on his plate for you. The children assembled at his feet and tore at the tripe until they'd all wrenched a piece for themselves. Kole swallowed his portion in one piece and started hankering for his sisters. Iyafemi, Kole is as thin as an old man's cane. Why are you not feeding my son? There was far too much concern in Baba Segi's voice for anyone to take him seriously. I feed him, but the food disappears as soon as it reaches his belly. That boy would eat this entire house if you let him. Then cook him this house, and when he has eaten that, serve him the neighbors too. My children must eat their fill. It won't do for them to look like beggars when their father worked so hard to keep the skin of their bellies taut. My Kole must grow big and strong so he can marry many wives and bear many children. Is that not so, Kole? Yes, Baba, I want to be just like you. Everyone laughed at Kole's precociousness, so no one heard Iyafemi whisper, God forbid, under her breath. Desperate to return to the center of attention, Baba Segi leaned onto one buttock and let out an explosive fart. The children looked at one another and giggled. Iya Segi, deadpan, inched towards him and asked if he needed some cold water to calm his stomach. Iya Tokwe stared unblinking at the TV, while Iya Femi pinched her nostrils and turned her lips down at the corners. Bolanle, who had been wishing away Baba Segi's visits to her bedroom that night, shifted a little closer to Iya Tokwe's armchair. Iya Tokwe saw her and moved to the center of her seat, as if to make room for the younger wife. Iya Femi sneered at the gesture from across the room. Only Baba Segi's armchair faced the TV directly. His wife's, except Bolanle, who hadn't earned her right to an armchair, kept their seats at the angle their husband insisted on. Baba Segi liked to observe their facial expressions, how widely they smiled after watching comedy sketches, how many tears they shed when they were gripped by agonizing dramas. The wives, knowing they were being watched, stared at the screen, never swiveling to look Baba Segi smack in the face. As the show came to an end, everyone prepared themselves for the last ritual of the evening, the communal watching of the 7 o'clock news. Before the newscaster even opened her mouth, it was obvious that she was a little off balance. She blinked several times in quick succession, and a lump moved up and down her throat as she spoke. A 40-year-old man named by the police as James Jerome has been detained after the plastic bag he was carrying was found to contain what medical experts have identified as 3 preterm fetuses. In April, the police launched a nationwide appeal for any information on the spate of ritual murders. In the last year alone, the bodies of 18 women have been recovered, all with fatal wounds to their pelvic region. The police are confident that Mr. Jerome's arrest will lead to the arraignment of the entire gang. Mr. Jerome used to work at the University College Hospital, Ibadan, as a mortuary attendant. Halfway into the final paragraph, a short clip of James Jerome on a bench, handcuffed and dabbing a head wound, appeared on the screen. He didn't look at all remorseful, just annoyed with himself. Arranged on a piece of white cloth before him were 3 blood-stained fetuses, all head with scrawny little bodies. They seemed to come alive each time a strong wind lifted flakes of dry blood. Segi yanked her head tie off her head and flung it across the room, yelling, "Why? Why kill innocent children?" Iyatope gripped her belly as if she were experiencing labor pains, and Diyafemi, who proclaimed Jesus as her Lord and Savior, didn't sound at all like a believer. She pointed at the spot where James Jerome's face had been and cursed. "May you not miss your way to hell. May sleep possess you on the day mercy is passing. May you leave your front door open on the day death is on the prowl." The children huddled closer together and concluded that the news had induced maternal madness. But their father too sat transfixed. Not caring that they might anger their mothers, the children looked to Bolanle with pleading eyes. Bolanle's lips trembled, and a steady stream of tears trickled down her cheeks. After a few minutes, she got up and fled the room. Baba Segi felt his stomach growling and made to grab the bowl of hand-wash water. He missed the bowl completely and covered the cream-colored rug with his undigested supper. Segi and Iyatope ran to his side and fluttered around him like harried hens. They lifted Baba Segi by his arms, guided him to his bedroom, and covered him with a light sheet, leaving Iyafemi to salvage the rug with soapy water and Dettol. Later that night, Baba Segi staggered down the wide corridor that the wives' bedrooms were cut from. Like he always did, he caressed Iyasegi's door on the right, touched the knob on Iyatope's door on the left. He listened for voices at Iyafemi's door, and finally paused at the threshold of Bolanle's room. He didn't knock. He just pushed the door open with his toe and brightened the room with the corridor light. He wanted to see how much Bolanle had prepared herself for him. He wanted to know if she had covered her nakedness with a cloth like the other wives did, or if she was wearing those accursed pajamas. His eyes caught the pink sleeves, so he let out a short, sharp breath through flared nostrils. He often wondered why a woman would want to go to bed dressed like a man, but he never mentioned it, lest he appeared uncivilized. Bolanle sat up in bed. Pretending to be startled, she rubbed her eyes and turned to acknowledge the looming silhouette by her bedroom door. Baba Segi's large form was curled inwards like a boxing glove. He reached for the doorframe and rapped it with his fingernails. "Where did you read that a wife should leave the room when her husband is ailing?" he asked, as if Bolanle's education meant her every action was dictated by a manual. He didn't come in, nor did he close the door. He wanted every ghost that stalked the corridor to bear witness to her unseemliness. Like everyone else, I was sickened by what I saw. She threw her feet over the side of her bed and tightened a wrapper over her pyjama top. What do you know about what you saw? A woman cannot know the weight of a child until she has carried one in her womb. Bolanle was determined to deny him the pleasure of hurting her feelings. She lifted the bowl from her bedside table and pushed it towards his face so he got a full view of the rich oxblood clay. Baba Segi glanced at the bowl and winced. Bolanle threw a handful of nuts into her mouth to conceal her satisfaction. Baba Segi marched to her side and flopped onto the bed. Tonight, I have come to talk, Bolanle. His weight made the sprung mattress uneven. Yes, I have come to talk about the matter that threatens to turn us into enemies. I am listening, Baba Segi. I do not want to be your enemy, Bolanle said, relieved that sex wasn't on the cards. Your barrenness brings shame upon me, and I am sure that you as well are saddened by it. Every time I have suggested that we consult herbalists and prophets, you have called them conmen and rubbished their powers. Well, he inhaled deeply and raised his eyebrows. I have thought long and hard about it, and I think we should go to the hospital to talk to a doctor. He paused, expecting Bolanle to reject his proposal, but she just stared ahead, mindlessly throwing nuts into her mouth. Tomorrow at 6 a.m. then. With this, he hoisted himself onto his feet, using the bedpost for support, and prayed that morning would wake them well. Polygamist, Bolanle. I didn't just happen upon this room. I dreamt of the pale green walls before I arrived. Now, the built-in wardrobe is mine, and so is the ceiling fan. My window looks over a backyard with patchy but neatly trimmed grass. Damp clothes flap in the evening breeze and perfume the air with detergent. On the back wall, an iron drum is darkened from burnt refuse. A tap juts from the grass, and a weathered concrete slab lies beneath it. It is not a perfect view, but it is mine. There are no flowers or trees, no fields, no rolling hills, just a vegetable patch where Iyafemi cultivates joss peppers. I know that smell well. My mother used to cut them into fried eggs whenever she felt pregnant. The aroma from the frying pan would keep the rest of us on the cusp of a sneeze. Then one day, as Mama sat in the front yard, wrinkling her nose, the babies would leak down her leg. Who could blame them? Maybe they heard her relentless nagging and decided that it was better to be born unformed. I must have covered my ears when I was in her womb, or perhaps she was quieter then. Don't get me wrong, I didn't only come here to get away from my mother. I came to escape the feeling of filth that followed me around. If I stayed at home, I knew the day would come when Mama would open my bedroom door and find pools of blood at my wrists. After everything happened, I tried hard to continue being myself, but I slowly disappeared. I became Bolanle, the soiled, damaged woman. Except that was hard too, because Mama kept trying to make me do all the things the old Bolanle would have done. Don't you think you should get a job, Bolanle? Won't you apply for this bank job in the newspapers, Bolanle? Didn't you see the handsome boy that was looking at you, Bolanle? How could I tell her that I had failed to preserve my dignity? I was too ashamed to let her see the fickle shell I'd become. Inevitably, it became unbearable. The more she pushed, the more I resisted. I didn't want a job. I didn't want a white wedding. I just wanted the war between who I used to be and who I'd become to end. I didn't want to fight anymore. Somehow, it all made perfect sense when I met Baba Segi. At last, I would be able to empty myself of my sorrow. I would be with a man who accepted me, one who didn't ask questions or find my quietness unsettling. I knew Baba Segi wouldn't be like younger men who demanded explanations for the faraway look in my eye. Baba Segi was content when I said nothing. So yes, I chose this home. Not for the monthly allowance, not for the lace skirt suits, and not for the coral bracelets. Those things mean nothing to me. I chose this family to regain my life, to heal in anonymity. And when you choose a family, you stay with them. You stay with your husband, even when your friends call him a polygamist ogre. You stay with him when your mother says he's an overfed orangutan. You look at him in another light and see a large but kindly, generous soul. When I first met him, I told my sister Lara that I'd found the perfect man for me. You want to marry a polygamist and be part of a big ugly family? Mama will go crazy. When will you tell her? She cackled. She knew that for once it would be me on the receiving end of Mama's exasperation. Soon, I said. Mama's reaction was predictable. She listened impatiently to my intentions and then said she would like to claw out the eyes of this man who had misled me. Just to hear him wail, she added. When she saw that I was unmoved, she tried her unique brand of persuasion. Your future will be futile and uninteresting, she said. Polygamy is for gold diggers and bush dwellers, not educated children brought up in a good Christian home. I thought this was funny because we'd never been churchgoers. Mama said it was shameful for a woman to go to church without her husband, and Daddy said Sundays were supposed to be days of rest, as the Bible itself stipulated. By the time Mama was wailing about me embarrassing my bloodline, I was daydreaming about the peace I would have in my husband's house. The day Baba Segi came to collect me, I scanned the bedroom I'd shared with my sister for 21 years. The powdery fadedness of the aquamarine walls, the window with missing louvers and rusted frames, Lara's waist beads hanging from a nail above her bed, the small bookcase displaying my collection of Mills and Boon novels. I would miss the comforting tales of syrupy romance that I immersed myself in. I knew I couldn't take them all, so I picked out 6. Lara snorted in her sleep, and I wondered what my nights would be like without the constancy of her breathing or her sleep-talking. She fought Mama constantly in her nightmares. Whatever courtesies held her back during the day were discarded at nighttime. It didn't bother me that I wouldn't have a tiered wedding cake, confetti, a veil, or a highfalutin sermon from a practiced priest. I didn't expect any nuggets of wisdom from my mother, no echoes of "look after our daughter" from my father, and certainly no mad dash for a final carside embrace from Lara. Since I'd announced my departure date, Lara had withdrawn from me, as if I was a deserter. Every time she walked out of our bedroom, she would shut the door firmly, not slamming it, as I knew she'd have wanted to. After a brief vote of thanks, Baba Segi waited in the pickup truck with his driver. I put my bags in the back and sat next to him. I must have looked uncertain as the vehicle picked up speed because Baba Segi turned to me with a reassuring smile. Everyone is prepared for your arrival. Tonight, you will sleep in your own bedroom. He ran his knuckles along my thigh. When I noticed that the driver's eyes followed, I laid my knee flush against the car seat. I knew there was something about that Taju fellow I wouldn't like. We dipped and dived along the rain-ravaged roads, jolted from side to side, until we paused behind a battered blue Mercedes at Agbowo Junction. My insides felt as if they'd been stirred with a heavy wooden spoon. While we waited for the traffic warden to wave us through, bread sellers descended on the pickup. Little fingers force-fed the car through the half-open window on the passenger side. I recoiled and leaned heavily on Baba Segi. Every hand clutched a clear polythene bag containing a loaf of bread and a bright-coloured rectangular label. God's will bread, Jesus' body bread, home of godliness bread, my day of miracle bread, altar of mercy bread. Give my new wife 1 loaf each, Baba Segi said. The loaves dropped onto my lap, and the tang of fermented dough rose to my nostrils. I resisted the urge to shake them onto the footmat. If Baba Segi knew me better, he'd realize how much I detested bread, the way it clogged up the throat and hardened the belly. I wondered how much my new family would like it when I appeared, arms laden with warm constipation. Baba Segi pushed 20 naira notes into the children's palms and nodded Taju back onto the road. There are many things in this life to find joy in, so you mustn't be downcast. Give some thought to your husband. I forced a smile. Motorcycles darted through the traffic and pumped fading clouds of smoke into our faces. Baba Segi fanned his nostrils and belched. I looked away so I wouldn't embarrass him. He wasn't the most sophisticated man, but there was time. He wasn't so old that he couldn't change. I told myself I would devote a few hours a night to teaching him good manners. We'll be home soon. Baba Segi took my left hand into both of his and leaned forward, eagerly setting his eyes on the road ahead like a child. I am eager to meet my new family, I said, but the words came out flat and feeble. Taju smirked and cast me a mocking side glance. I was right. I didn't like him. I am eager for my body to meet yours, Baba Segi whispered. After a few more minutes of hand-stroking, we turned into a short driveway. There was a tarpaulin sheet draped over 4 wooden poles. 3 girls were playing 10-10 at the gate. They were dressed in smocks cut from the same cheap, checkered fabric. Wisps of braided hair met atop their heads like clasped fingers. As soon as they spotted the pickup approaching, they jumped into the air and cheered. Before long, more children had joined in the "Father has returned" chant. An older boy appeared and pulled them out of harm's way. The children couldn't hide their disappointment when they saw me, but Baba Segi didn't appear to notice. He puffed out his chest and told the children to welcome their new auntie. The girls curtsied brusquely, and the boys did hurried half-bows. Baba Segi, they are the very image of you, I said to him. Who will leopard cubs resemble, if not the leopard? Let us go indoors and meet the mother of the home and my other wives. He slid a tinted glass door aside, and there they were, his wives, lined up in a row, caught, satisfying their curiosity. I lowered myself onto my knees and greeted them. Only the one wearing dowdy clothes bothered to open her mouth, quickly glancing at the other wives. The large one rolled onto her toes and gave me a hair-to-shoe examination. I guessed that she was the mother of the home. She stood tall, hands on hips. The wife with crimson lipstick wore 3 gold bangles that jiggled at her wrist. I'd never seen such a contrast in skin color. She might as well have been a zebra. While her forearms had a naturally deep hue, her knuckles were a sandy yellow. Purple veins rippled as she attacked her blackhead on her chin. She hummed a distant response to my greeting. They would need lessons in etiquette too. I perched on a stool while the wives sat in large armchairs. The children shuffled around the room and whispered amongst themselves. To ease the uncomfortable silence, I told the wife with 2-tone skin how gorgeous her skirt and blouse were. The fabric was 100% linen, embroidered with small violets. Even the buttons were shaped like flower buds. Uneducated women wear good things too, she retorted. I'd have to start showing them how to take compliments gracefully. To take my mind off the awkwardness, I looked outside through the tinted glass doors. At that moment, a blazing sunray struck the darkened glass and filtered into the room through a small chip. The chip broke the beam with its jagged edges and scattered embers all over the room. One landed on my foot like a fallen firefly. Then the sun crept behind a cloud and everything dissolved into hot air. But the chip remained, secretly concealing its radiance behind the small crack, shaped like a tick of a tentative hand. I took it as a sign. I was home. Will you women gape at my new wife until I starve to death? Baba Segi asked. Not in this lifetime, my lord. The eldest wife, Segi, moved quickly for one so generously proportioned. The floor shuddered with her every step. The other wives scurried after her. Looking back, now that 2 years have passed, I realize how naive I was to expect a warmer welcome. I was foolish to think I would just be an insignificant addition, when in reality, I was coming to take away from them. With my arrival, 2.33 nights with Baba Segi became 1.75. His affections, already thinly divided, now had to be spread amongst 4 instead of 3. The women have not changed. Iyatokwe is still cordial, even kind when I am alone in the house with her. She doesn't say much, except when she's talking about hair. Her eyeballs bounce around in their sockets, and she uses her fingers to draw the hairstyles in thin air. I often ask her to describe them again, just to hear a friendly voice that belongs to another grown woman. The other 2 are a different story. They have not forgiven me for the affection Babasegi has for me. Iyasegi and Iyafemi still shout, hiss and spit. They sweep the floor, all the time singing satirical songs to ridicule me. But it's not their fault that they are so uncouth. Living with them has taught me the value of education, of enlightenment. I have seen the dark side of illiteracy. So deep-seated is their disdain for my university degree that they smear my books with palm oil and hide them under the kitchen cupboards. I have often found missing pages from my novels in the dustbin, the words scribbled over with charcoal. It's not as if I haven't tried. I offered to teach the wives to read. Iyatokwe was keen to learn, but then I found Iyafemi tearing out sheets from the exercise books to line the kitchen cupboards. When I reminded her why I'd bought them, she said I could crawl into the cabinets and teach the insects if I still wanted the exercise books to serve that purpose. I have tried to help the children too. I once told them to assemble in the dining room every evening so I could read to them. Only Iyatokwe's daughters turned up the first day. The next morning, Iyasegi told me not to be in a hurry, that I should wait until I have my own children if I was so eager to become a teacher. Such is the extent to which they conceal their yearning for knowledge. They try to throw me off by pretending their coarseness is a thing of pride, but I see through the subterfuge. I will not give up on them. I will bring light to their darkness. The children mostly follow the examples that their mothers set them. Iyafemi's sons will not sit on a chair I have vacated. When I walk past them in the corridor, they turn to the wall and flatten themselves against it. No matter how many times I offer them sweets, they treat me as if I have a contagious disease. I can only wonder what their mother has filled their young ears with. Iyatokwe's girls are polite but distant. Sometimes they bring my meals to my bedroom door. I know their footsteps. They shuffle around the house together, arm in arm like conjoined triplets. Segi has 2 children. The eldest, Segi, is 15. She is a dutiful sister to her siblings, but I think she is afraid that I have come to take her place. I see her anger when I offer to help the other children with homework. She doesn't speak to me, but I often see her shadow by the door. It is a wonder that she hasn't told Iyasegi that Akin, her brother, comes to my room when he needs help with his schoolwork. Akin is my favorite. He knocks before he enters my room. He comes to help me if I have heavy bags. As he does with all the other wives, he greets me before I greet him. I tell him he was born with decorum. When he asks what decorum means, I tell him to look it up in the dictionary. He does and thanks me the next day. One day, they will all love me. I will buy their affection with the money Babasegi gives me if I have to. I will bring chocolate home for the little ones. I will buy Akin a brand new satchel and get Segi one of those velvet hairbands to harness that wild mane of hers. I will be a big sister to her. I will tell her everything I know about the world so she doesn't make the mistakes I made. One day, they will all accept me as a member of this family. One day, I will have a child of my own. and everything will fall into its place. My husband will delight in me again, the way he did before my barrenness ate away at his affection. Heavy period. Baba Segi yelled frantically as he scrambled down the corridor to Bolanle's room. Iya Segi, help me! I can't find Bolanle. Oh, we were supposed to go to hospital today. Where is she? What have you lost, Baba Segi? Iya Segi flung her room door open. It's Bolanle. She's gone. She must have run away in the middle of the night. All the money I have spent on her is wasted. My graduate is gone. One leg was in his trousers. The other was caught in the waistband, so he was hopping along, sweat dripping from his bare chest. Have you looked in her bedroom? Iya Segi tried to join in the panic, but her words came out too slowly, too comfortably. I have looked everywhere. These educated girls. They take your money and they abandon you. After all you have done for her. What a wretch. She has run off to another man, no doubt. Baba, she's here, asleep in the living room. Segi leaned into the corridor with soap suds all the way up to her elbows. Where? Let me see for myself. Bolanle, Bolanle. Baba Segi hopped into the living room and his eyes fell on Bolanle, who was lying in Iyatokwe's armchair with her eyes closed. By now, the other wives too had gathered at the mouth of the corridor and were trying to make sense of the furore. They watched Baba Segi grab Bolanle by the shoulders and shake her. She is here, alive! Thank the gods, he exclaimed. Iya Segi retraced her steps to her room without making a sound. I am awake now. Bolanle gasped so Baba Segi wouldn't crease the pink stripes on her shoulder pads. Iyafemi flicked on the lights, and for the first time, Baba Segi caught a glimpse of Bolanle. She had clearly been extra careful when applying her makeup. Her eyebrows were penciled in so they were symmetrical, not like the slapdash jagged lines Iyafemi sketched on her face. She had lined her lips with burgundy and used the tip of her little finger to apply a sheer coat of gold to their fullness. Her toes were edged into a pair of fuchsia slip-ons. Baba's hands shot upwards as if the pink stripes were hot iron rods. Without another word, he stood up straight and marched to his bedroom. Iyatokwe too returned to her bedroom, but Iyafemi rushed after Segi, wanting to hear every detail. Bolanle smoothed back her hair. At 6 o'clock, Taju rapped on the metal doorframe. Bolanle had fallen asleep again. The rapping grew louder until Iyafemi barged in from the kitchen, making as much noise as she could with the keys. I don't know how some people sleep as if they are dead. She tightened her wrapper over her bosom. Let me open the door for you, Mr. Taju. Some people do not know you are a Balele, head of your own household. Thank you, Iyafemi. Good morning. I hope you woke well. Let us just say that we woke and leave it at that. She shot a sweeping side glance in Bolanle's direction. What about you? The padlock came off, and then the chain. Who would see your face and not wake well anyway? Taju lowered his voice to a whisper and hummed his appreciation of Iyafemi's bare skin, glistening from the morning humidity. Mr. Taju, one would think you had not just prized your body from your wife's embrace. Anyway, it is good that you have come on time. I think Baba Segi wants to leave early this morning. Iyafemi walked back into the sitting room with Taju close behind her. Taju had only ever been late once, about a year before, when he'd arrived with his shirt slung over his left shoulder and nail marks across his forehead. Ejecting a toothpick from between his teeth and pushing it into his afro, he claimed that he had beaten his wife senseless for letting his only son suck on a coin. This happened about a week after a male senator slapped a female colleague. The slap had resonated through all the quiet meeting rooms of the Senate building and into the heart of every man on the street. It seemed to awaken a loosely fettered beast. Of course, the male senator blamed the devil for his actions, and the two senators were soon seen embracing on national television. The same could not be said for the man on the street. Men were slapping their womenfolk as if it had become a national sport. At every street corner, disgruntled wives swung suitcases onto their heads, hoping to be persuaded to return home. At the marketplace, the Igbo fabric merchants tugged women roughly by the sleeve. Peeved taxi drivers prodded the heads of mothers who bargained with them. Young girls were assaulted and stripped naked in the streets. Even in the labor wards, baby girls were frowned upon by their fathers. Taju, too, was inspired to throw his best punch. When Baba Segi finally summoned Bolanle, she was fast asleep, dreaming of Segun, a boy from her past. It was the same dream she always had. He was standing in the middle of a busy dance floor, beckoning to her. She'd start making her way towards him, but then he'd reach into his breast pocket and throw a fistful of small golden nuggets high into the air. Suddenly, all the women in the disco would abandon their partners for Segun's side, and Bolanle would then be left standing there, unable to make out his physique, underneath the mountain of miniskirts and low-cut tops. "We must be there by 6:50. Baba Segi opened the door slightly, rammed his words in, and disappeared. Before Bolanle could finish fastening the buckles on her sandals, she heard the front door slam shut. Baba Segi was talking to Taju through the open window of the pickup when she finally caught up with him. "Get in," he ordered, barely giving her enough room to press through. "Next to Mr. Taju." "If you don't want to sit next to me, you can sit in the back. Only the wind is uncomfortably cool at this time of the morning," Taju retorted. Baba Segi looked at Taju and grinned. Bolanle might have been going to the hospital, dressed like a graduate, but his driver could still put her in her place. As Bolanle squeezed between the two men, Baba Segi plotted ways in which he could keep her in the shadows, ways to keep her made-up face out of the daylight. He was determined to render her efforts useless. As they approached the end of their street, the night guard saluted. He ordered them to wait and reached beyond the front tires to remove a plank that was riddled with long, rusty nails. He raised the metal bar, a deterrent to the armed robbers who used to terrorize the neighborhood. Baba Segi took a 50 naira note from a black leather pouch and thrust it into the night guard's hand. The guard took off his hat and waved. They made their way towards Songo Road, with the metal rails attached to the pickup rattling behind them. Taju knew the road well and navigated with the precision of a wasp. He skimmed the rims of the large potholes, throwing his passengers within an inch of their seats. The minute they turned into Songo Road, they spotted policemen. One of them was putting out the flames on kerosene-filled cans that lit up their makeshift checkpoints. Two more policemen were emptying out the night's takings from their pockets and exchanging swigs from a portable bottle of Napoleon Chevalier. Their guns lay on the ground, swaddled by black raincoats. When the policeman blowing out flames saw them approaching, he put down the lamp he was holding and raised his baton. "Hold it!" he yelled. He didn't lower his baton or open his eyes until the pickup's bonnet was within half a yard of his worn black trousers. "Where are you going this early morning? Are you criminals?" He peered at them through the passenger window. His eyes softened briefly when they fell on Bolanle, but when she didn't engage his gaze, he resumed his interrogation. "Who are you? Identify yourselves." "Sergeant, I am Mr. Ishola Alao. We are going to UCH. Baba Segi smiled sheepishly as his hand crept towards his black pouch. "Who is sick?" the policeman inquired, feigning interest. He had spotted the bulging pouch and the tentative journey Baba Segi's hand was making towards it. Both Baba Segi and Taju looked at Bolanle, but the policeman's eyes were squarely fixed on the blue 50 naira note edging towards his open palm. He looked in the direction of his colleagues. When he was certain they were still bent over their raincoats, he shoved his crutch into the passenger window and stuffed the note into it. His zip was within 2 inches of Baba Segi's face. "Drive!" the policeman commanded, swooping on the taxi behind them. When the policemen were out of sight, Baba Segi leaned out of the car and spat into a large pothole. There was no food in his belly, yet he still had to empty himself. Bolanle glanced at him, but he rejected her concern and wiped his lips with the back of his hand. Baba Segi could never keep things in. He was open-ended. His senses were directly connected to his gut, and anything that didn't agree with him had a way of accelerating his digestive system. Bad smells, bad news, and the sight of anything vaguely repulsive had an expulsive effect. What went in through his mouth recently shot out through his mouth, and what was already settled in his belly sped through his intestines and out of his rear end. Only after clearing his digestive system could Baba Segi regain his calm. Once, when his shop assistants came to tell him that his shop had been burgled, he listened attentively and watched as they read out the list of what had been stolen. After a while, he tensed his buttocks and strode to the toilet. Minutes later, he reappeared, all worry gone from his face. "All I can say is, what has happened, he said. This was not the philosophical response the perplexed employees expected. They exchanged meaningful looks and wondered if Baba Segi was still suffering from shock. Bolanle hugged her elbows. Taju had discovered a new method of wrangling her. Every time he changed gear, he leaned his arm close to her breast. In the distance, an old train snorted and let out a gasp before it commenced its daily chugging. Songo Road was waking up. Minibus drivers were starting up their vehicles and spilling out of the overcrowded motor parks. Women with sleeping babies on their backs swept out their marketplace stalls and tut-tutted at the sight of cigarette butts and broken bottles, leftovers of the night's revelry. The University College Hospital, or UCH as it was known, had a horrible reputation. The lack of government funding, coupled with the misappropriation of the little the hospital generated, had left the buildings dilapidated. Crucial medical tests were rationed, and the doctors refused to treat patients who hadn't brought their own medicine. The only reason people went there, rather than to the thousands of back-alley clinics, was that they could be sure the doctors had proper medical degrees. Bolanle knew they were close as soon as she saw the palm trees that lined the main entrance and shielded early morning mourners from the sun's unyielding rays. There were always tears at the gate, because it was here that the news of death was passed on to broken-hearted family members. Here, there was no risk of them throwing themselves over the hospital's many balconies. Besides this, the main gate was an awkward place to make a scene. There were too many people wrapped up in their own problems, so the mourners sat on big round boulders and wept silently. "Where can I park?" Taju asked one of the security guards positioned around the gates to enforce organized grieving. "Do I look like a parking attendant?" barked the man as he walked away. "Sorry, I thought you were here to work. I didn't realize this was your father's living room." Taju hissed as he drove off, tires screeching. Before the guard could turn and wag a finger, they were negotiating the roundabout in front of the main building. They must have driven around for 10 minutes in search of a parking space before Baba Segi finally suggested that Taju let them out. "There is a space there, sir," Taju said, pointing at an empty spot under a sign that said mortuary. "Are you sure you want to park there?" "No problem, sir. I will stay here in the car. Nothing will happen." Taju beat his chest as if he had dominion over the ghosts that lay beyond the big grey door and whatever mischief they might have in mind. "Well, at least we know where to find you. We shouldn't be too long." "Go well, sir." Taju ignored Bolanle. He ruffled his hair for a toothpick and inserted it between his teeth. When Bolanle and Baba Segi reached the top of the first flight of stairs, the landing opened up into a long corridor that stretched out in both directions. Baba Segi glimpsed a figure in a white coat and ran to him. Doctor, I need somebody to help me. It is my wife's womb," he panted. The medic surveyed Bolanle's waistline and inquired if she was in labor. "No," Bolanle replied. Before Baba Segi could further humiliate her, she added calmly, "We are here to seek medical advice." "I see," the doctor said, nodding. "Is this your first time at UCH?" "I have never had reason to come here before. Ogun bears witness," Baba Segi blurted. Addressing Bolanle, the doctor gave them directions. "You'll need to go to the general outpatients department. Go to the end of this corridor and turn left. Down the stairs, Go to the end of that corridor, and you should see a big sign that says General Outpatients. It's written in blue, you can't miss it. Furious at the way the doctor stared at his wife, Baba Segi grabbed Bolanle by the elbow. Go your way, we'll find it ourselves. The astonished doctor watched Baba Segi drag Bolanle off in the wrong direction. After a few steps, Bolanle snatched her arm from his grip and led the way. Each time they walked past a hospital clock, Baba Segi would tap the face of his watch and frown in bewilderment. Soon, they approached the sign that read General Outpatients Department, GOD. The clocks have stopped, Baba Segi. It's not a miracle, neither is it magic. The clocks have simply stopped. Baba Segi looked at his watch one last time and lowered his arms to his side. A doctor was perched on the edge of a table in front. He turned linked fingers out above his head and yawned. Opposite him, a nurse sat upright on a plastic chair. The doctor yawned again, and only made to cover his mouth as his lips were closing. One arm of his glasses was held in place with a plaster, and his beard was disheveled. So you're going home to sleep all by yourself? The nurse placed her arms underneath her breasts so they jutted out. Her uniform was crisp and angelic. They both turned when a well-dressed young woman approached, trailed by a huffing, middle-aged man. The doctor scratched his head and headed back to his consultation cubicle. Can I help you? The nurse's tone was friendly, despite her small frown. There were voices in the background, other doctors holding consultations with their patients. Sister, it is this wife of mine who needs your help, Baba Segi said. What is your name? The nurse brought out a fresh pink folder from the desk she rested on. Bolanle Alao, Baba Segi replied. Date of birth? The nurse looked at Bolanle strangely. 19 January 1976, Baba Segi blurted again. Sir, is there a reason why she cannot answer herself? Is she deaf? The questions were directed at Baba Segi, but the nurse looked past him at Bolanle. I am her husband. That doesn't mean anything to us here, sir. We want to hear from the patient. How old are you now? Bolanle moved towards the edge of a blue plastic chair and whispered, 25. And what brings you here today? Bolanle knew what Baba Segi wanted to hear. I am barren. Is this your first visit to a hospital about this matter, or were you referred? This is my first visit. Address? 1. Shaibu Street, Songo. Religion? Christian. Level of education? BA, university graduate. The nurse's eyes shot up in surprise and then glanced briefly at Baba Segi. Next of kin? For a moment, Bolanle went blank. All her life it had been her mother, the one person who would drop everything and run to her aid. Bolanle remembered the last conversation they had before she left for Baba Segi's house. Have you lost your brain? After I scraped my salary together, month after month, to put you and your sister through university, you want to betray me? Her mother asked. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and she was due to move to Baba Segi's house later that day. Mama, I'm doing what is best for me. Bolanle had rehearsed her answer. Is that what this is all about? Is it the prospect of stuffing fat into your mouth that has led you into this? If that is so, Bolanle, remember all the days that I slaved for you. Cast your mind back to all that I have deprived myself of for you and your sister. Have you not learned anything from the words that have fallen from my mouth all these years? Is your back broken that you cannot sow what you seek to reap from this man's table? I am doing what is best for me, Mama. Please write Mr. Ishola Alao, Baba Segi shouted now. I am her next of kin. You should have stayed in your father's house if you wanted your mother to be your next of kin. Bolanle raised a palm to her mouth to prevent any more words from flying out. She hadn't realized she'd said her mother's name. The nurse drew a line across what she'd written and started over. Her writing was swift yet leisurely, clear with no sharp angles. She handed the empty folder to Bolanle. Go to cubicle 5. She pointed to the empty cubicle, even though the number 5 was emblazoned on a white A4 sheet and tacked to the door. Baba Segi kept his eye on the pink folder. "Hold it tight," he mumbled. The doctor's eyes were bloodshot, but they responded to every sound in the room. As soon as the couple walked in, he stood up to take the pink folder from Bolanle and offered them seats on the other side of the table. "I am Dr. Usman. My job is to try to understand the nature of your ailment so I can refer you to one of our specialists." "You mean we wasted our time coming here? Why can we not go straight to the special doctor? I'm a very busy man, you know, and this is a very serious matter." Baba Segi had jumped to his feet. Bolanle put a hand to her face and kneaded her eyebrows with her fingertips. The doctor spotted it. She tugged at Baba Segi's sleeve, but he threw off her hand. Dr. Usman spotted that too. Baba Segi slowly sat down, in his own time. The doctor wanted so badly to roll his eyes that he had to raise his eyebrows to stop himself. He didn't want to appear condescending, if only for the sake of the young woman sitting opposite him. "I'm sorry, sir, but unfortunately, no specialist in this hospital will see you unless you have seen us first. That is why we are here, and that is the way things work." Baba Segi folded his arms and rocked on his seat, all the time mumbling. "I presume you are husband and wife?" the doctor inquired, preparing to scrawl across a blank sheet of paper. A fist moved to Baba Segi's waist. "Yes, she is my wife." "Very good. So, Mrs. Alao?" "Yes," Bolanle responded tentatively. No one had ever called her that before. "How long have you been married?" "Nearly 3 years," Baba Segi replied. "Bolanle, how old were you when you started menstruating?" "I was 13. "And how long do you normally menstruate for? How many days each month, I mean?" 4 to 5 days. Heavy? Light?" Baba Segi couldn't hold back. "Do you not know that you are talking to another man's wife? All these questions you are asking are meaningless. She is barren." "Mr. Alao, I'm conducting a medical investigation on my patient. The only reason you're allowed to be here is that she has permitted it." He shot Bolanle a sympathetic look. "If you cannot conduct yourself properly, I will have to ask you to leave. Just remember that she's somebody's wife." "Now, I was asking about your..." "They are always heavy," Bolanle replied. "Very good. And are they painful?" "No, not at all." "Good. Do you and your husband have regular coitus?" "What is the meaning of coitus? Don't think the two of you can bamboozle me because I did not go to university," Baba Segi said. Bolanle smiled wryly and shook her head. "I was asking Mrs. Alao how frequently you have sexual relations." "She gets her ration on Tuesdays, and sometimes she gets an extra day. No less, no more than any of my other wives. It is her womb that is not working." "Coitus once a week." The doctor pronounced each syllable, then looked long and hard at Baba Segi to emphasize that his embellishment was neither required nor helpful. "So there are other wives? And you are wife number..." "She is number 4. Baba Segi held up 4 fat fingers. "Number 4. "I take it there are other children? I know it's bad luck to say how many, but perhaps you could tell me roughly how many children you have." "You dare to call my children rough?" "No, sir. I mean approximately, an estimate. How many? Over 15? Over 10? Over 5? Dr. Usman exhaled sharply. "Many more than 5. "But fewer than 10? "I would have had more than 10 now, if this woman's womb was not hostile to my seed." The doctor leaned back into the old leather seat. The fabric was cracking like shattered glass. "Mrs. Alao, how long have you been sexually active?" Silence. Bolanle's mind reeled. Did false starts count? Or was he referring to consensual sex? "Mrs. Alao, when did you have your first sexual encounter?" the doctor asked again. I was the first. I was 15 and 8 months, 4 months before my 16th birthday." "Ha!" Baba Segi placed both palms on the top of his head and began to hum at an unsettling pitch. Dr. Usman threw his pen on the folder and tightened his brow. Listen, Mr. Alao, you are obstructing this consultation. Plus, I believe you are intimidating my patient. Your patient? Baba Segi sneered. She is my wife. I am the one who has married her. Why should you care? Dr. Usman often had to ask mothers, husbands, sisters to wait outside the cubicle, so he picked up the receiver of the phone and made to press a red button. I'm afraid I am going to invite security to. Please, doctor, let us continue. It wasn't so much the sound of Bolanle's voice, but the volume that made Dr. Usman replace the receiver. As you please, Mrs. Alao. Now, have you ever been pregnant? Baba Segi turned his entire belly towards Bolanle. A nerve shuddered down his leg and set his right foot in motion, making the sole of his slipper slap the linoleum flooring. Yes, Bolanle said. The slipper slapping stopped abruptly. The doctor continued. How many times? Once. The pregnancy was terminated. Bolanle stared ahead. Can you tell me where the procedure took place? I don't remember. It was done by a nurse somewhere near Mokala. I don't remember. Dr. Usman braced himself when Baba Segi raised his hand. He thought he was going to strike his wife, but instead, the older man opened his mouth and bawled. Where is your toilet? Over and over again. Dr. Usman shoveled him out of the cubicle and in the direction of the men's room. Back in the cubicle, Bolanle rummaged through her handbag, and Dr. Usman pretended to read over his notes. Eventually, Baba Segi pushed the cubicle door open. He looked subdued, and the strain was gone from his face. I will be in the pickup, he whispered. Doctor, when you buy guavas in the marketplace, you cannot open every single one to check for rottenness. And where you find rottenness, you do not always throw away the guava. You bite around the rot and hope that it will quench your craving. Mr. Alao, it's admirable that you have taken this attitude because this is by no means the end. We are hardly at the beginning. There is a lot to be done before you can even conclude that the guava is rotten. There are tests we must do. Strangely, Dr. Usman's heart went out to Baba Segi, who looked like he had been struck with a big whip. Tell her what to do next. With that, he waddled out of the door and let it close by itself. The hem of his trousers mopped the length of the corridor. Mrs. Alao, I don't want you to worry, the doctor reassured Bolanle. We haven't seen anything conclusive yet. We haven't even looked. But bearing in mind all you have told me, I have a few suggestions that might bring us closer to a diagnosis. You will need to have a pelvic ultrasound. There is always the risk of damage to the wall of the womb if the procedure isn't done by a qualified surgeon. This often leads to fibrosis, adhesions on the wall of the womb. As you can imagine, a scarred womb is not conducive to fetal development. Dr. Dibia is the gynecologist you will see. His clinics are on Mondays. I will give you a referral letter, which you must take to the O&G department on your way out of here. They will check his timetable and book you in. When you return, be sure to bring the results of your pelvic ultrasound with you. You'll also need to do these blood tests. Bring those results as well. He glanced up from his form filling to find Bolanle absent-mindedly pressing a pimple on her face. Mrs. Alao, there's no reason to be worried. I'm not. I'm just listening to every word you're saying. Good. Are you going to be all right? Your husband seemed a little agitated. Is there somewhere you can go? I'll be fine. What more can he do to me? He can't humiliate me any more than he has done already. His other wives can't be any more hostile to me. He is my husband, and I will return to his house. The environment you have described does not sound very healthy to... Bolanle did not let him finish. It is good that he has heard the things I said today. Perhaps they should have been said before. The world turns, and we do too within it. Who can say what sins pursue us? She took the referral letter and the test request forms from the table. Thank you, doctor. Back at the car park, Taju could see that his boss was not in the mood for talking, and he couldn't help but wonder why he was carrying the stench of loosened bowels. Bolanle, on her part, approached the vehicle with peace in her eyes. Take us home, Babasegi barked. I would like to be dropped off at Awolowo Road Junction, so I can visit my parents. Then we will take you to your father's gate. I think it would be better if you went home to change first. Babasegi looked at his trousers and shifted to the middle seat. He reasoned that it would be less irksome if he sat in the middle as opposed to sitting by the door. He didn't want to have to stand up to let Bolanle out. Bolanle pointed her nose outside the window for fresh air. They drove past Songo and stopped at Awolowo Junction. As always, there were girls standing under the tree, hoping to flag down a taxi. No one wanted to brave the sun and trudge to the taxi rank. Bolanle reached for the handle. Not caring that Taju was listening, she turned to Babasegi, one foot firmly placed on the cobbled pavement. We are to go back next Monday. Our appointment is at 10 a.m. and we'll be seeing a different doctor. She flashed the appointment card and the test requests. When will you be back home? It was still too early for him to return to anything related to doctors and hospitals. In the evening, probably around 6. Do not be late for family time. Cracks, Bolanle. I shut the vehicle door firmly. I waited by the roadside until they were out of sight before crossing. I had no intention at all of going to see my parents. I wanted to see what the market had in store for me. Songo Market was a long, muddy street. Shielded from the sun, the colours under the stall's rusted iron sheets blended into a collage of dreary hues. The oranges dulled into maroon, the violets and greens smeared into navy blue. Wading through the stalls amidst perspiring flesh was exhausting, but I was not deterred. I strode directly to the crockery section. My little pleasures were of utmost importance now, since they angered Babasegi and made him storm out of my bedroom. It wasn't always like this. In the early days, I used to look forward to Tuesdays. I would wash my hair on Monday afternoon, oil it, and divide it into 16 palm-measured mounds, each furrow revealing fine lines of glistening scalp. Babasegi liked us women to look like the old Oyo goddesses, queens who contemplated the lifting of every limb, deities who, when they heard their names, didn't just turn their heads in one brisk, carefree movement, but lifted their eyes from the floor and let their faces follow their long, proud necks by a fraction of a second. I'd wanted so much to please him then that I would rub myself with osun so that every strand of hair dissolved into my skin. I'd go to the market, buy the biggest snails, and painstakingly rinse off their mucus with sea salt and alum. I would fry him a feast and then submit to him. But things have changed. Now there is no pleasure in the pleasing, no sweetness in the surrender. Babasegi only comes to deposit his seed in my womb. He doesn't smile or tickle me. He doesn't make jokes about my youth. He just rams me into the mattress. Just a month ago, he barged into my room. Get dressed, he yelled. God has called a prophet to the mountaintop, and he will only be there for 4 more days. Let us go, so he will lay hands on your belly and perform a miracle. One of those white garment conmen, no doubt, I said. I told my husband that the only miracle the prophet would perform was relieving Babasegi of his hard-earned money. Listen to yourself, he shouted. Does your blood not boil when you see other women carrying babies on their backs? Do tears not fill your eyes when you see mothers suckling infants? You of all people should be willing to try everything. Offspring make our visit to this world complete. Do you want to remain a barren maggot? He stood over me, all 6.5 feet of him, both arms flailing. I covered my ears with my hands. It must have been my vulnerability that aroused him, because he returned at midnight to hammer me like never before. He emptied his testicles as deep into my womb as possible. It was as if he wanted to make it clear, with every thrust, that he didn't make light of his husbandly duties. He wanted to fuck me pregnant. If there was ever a moment when the memory of being raped became fresh in my mind, that was it. I walked through the market and spotted the tiny second-hand bric-a-brac stall ahead. It was too small to have a decent roof, so it was the only place in the market where vibrant colored wares could be honestly and accurately admired. My nose longed for the smell of old brass kettles, my eyes for the caustic stains at the bottom of aged bowls. As soon as my thighs brushed the table, I reached up for an old teacup and stroked the discolored cracks. I ran my knuckles along the chipped rim and felt the muscles in my neck loosen. Then my eyes caught an ivory bowl with embossed turquoise waves. Cherubs bearing goblets reached for the calloused rim with stubby fingers. Their faces lit up as the waves washed them around the bowl's belly. I caressed it, and my sadness fell away. This was my secret reprisal. "That one come all the way from Italy," the bold crockery hawker shrieked. There were droplets of sweat racing down the sides of his face. An irritable passerby pushed me towards him. "How much is it?" I asked. The man swept his forefinger across his forehead. "I won't take a kobo more than 500 naira from a beautiful lady like yourself." He smiled and shrugged his shoulders so that his collar licked the sweat that had gathered around his jawbone. I dipped my hand deep into my bag, doubled up 10 50 naira notes and pressed them into the hawker's hand. He looked around surreptitiously, nodded, and handed me my prize in a black plastic bag. When I first arrived in his house, I bought a large orange bowl and presented it to the wives. Iyafemi laughed when she saw it and said their husband only ate off white crockery, that he liked his food to supply color at mealtimes, that his food wasn't worth eating if he couldn't see the red of his palm oil and the green of his okra. I looked around the kitchen. True enough, it was filled with white plates and bland grey dishes. But before I could snatch back the bowl, Iyafemi deliberately knocked it to the floor, breaking it into two. I picked up the pieces and rushed to my bedroom. Later that evening, Akin knocked on my door to call me for dinner. When I opened it, he handed me an envelope and walked off quickly. Inside was a tube of super glue. Baba Segi will hate this bowl too, the way he hates all the other ones. I give him an eyeful of my decadent colors. It's the only way I get my own back. I walked to the bus stop on the far side of the market. Once on the bus, I opened the plastic bag and fingered the nail-sized stain at the bottom of the bowl. I poked it, pricked it, and half-heartedly tried to peel it off. I knew it was stuck fast, and my stomach twisted with excitement. Soon, I was on our street. It stretched before me like a lean arm, and the Alao house waited at the end of it like a large muscular chest. The bamboo scaffolding flexed, dwarfing the puny lodges around it. As I approached the gates, I spotted an electricity pole, which must have been felled by a rainstorm. A naked wire hung on a nearby tree like a stubborn strand of hair. When I get home, I thought, I must remember to slip Akin a note. He will come to my bedroom for help with his English homework. I'll tell him to warn his brothers and sisters not to go near the pole. He always does what I ask him. I won't say anything to the other children, so Iya Segi won't shout at me.